To reject truth because a pagan discovered it is not to reject the pagan, but to reject the God whose natural light is shed upon all men indiscriminately. That is a thought posted by Josh Summer on Twitter recently. He's referring to the value of Aristotle for Christians. I appreciate his statement, and it likewise applies to philosophical principles discovered or explained by Ayn Rand. Since last year, we've been meeting Saturday mornings, 9 a.m. Eastern, recording book discussions on the system of thought of Ayn Rand. We've done a series of 9 sessions on a new textbook of Americanism, The Politics of Ayn Rand, and we are now recording 34 sessions on another book, Objectivism, The Philosophy of Ayn Rand. We're planning to start releasing these discussion videos in order in our podcast feed. But before doing that, it seemed good to provide our general audience with some explanation. Why are we putting this time into understanding Ayn Rand, a pagan philosopher, anti-Christian in many respects? There are areas where she advocates things that we consider to be flat evil, not to mention just her atheism. But we're talking about Ayn Rand because she has discovered principles about how to form concepts that are useful. She has discovered principles about politics that are useful, and even about motivation, about axiology. And that is an idea that can be useful to Christians. In fact, there would have been no Desiring God by John Piper if John Piper had not encountered Ayn Rand's thought and engaged with it. So we're trying at ChristianIntellectual.com to help Christians see that there can be a value in the thought of this pagan thinker. There can be a value in plundering the Egyptians. Now, this is not an idea that most Christian thinkers throughout history would have found to be extraordinarily controversial. But in the day of the postmodern Van Tillians, where it is considered that everything that is true is found in the Bible that we need for life, unfortunately, we do find ourselves needing to tell people there is value in Aristotle. There is value in other thinkers throughout history. I mean, we are even in the position of having to defend John Locke. It's pretty sad. But let's talk about Ayn Rand and her unique contribution to philosophy, to how we approach ideology, those kinds of questions. Jacob has written an article, Why Christians Should Reconsider Ayn Rand. Could you tell us about your article, Jacob?
The idea behind the article is basically to present a vision to the people who don't need to be convinced about the value of secular thinkers, like you were just talking about, right? So the article assumes up front that you already have an historic Christian understanding of the value of secular thinkers, of plundering the Egyptians, so to speak. And if you got that mindset, then this article is there to present to you the reasons that you should see potential value in Ayn Rand the same way that you see potential value in figures like John Locke or Thomas Aquinas, if you consider him not a Christian like many Protestants would in certain areas of theology, or Aristotle or Plato or whoever else. So the point of the article is to present the unique value that Ayn Rand poses for the Christian and for the Christian worldview, the ways in which Ayn Rand's philosophy, in spite of her being an atheist, gets things right about the Christian worldview that many Christians themselves get wrong. That's the general thrust of the article, and it walks through certain major points that we think highlight that aspect of Rand's thought.
This article could be found at ChristianIntellectual.com/reconsider. It begins with this: everyone loves to hate Ayn Rand, even sometimes especially Christians. She's the left's favorite boogie woman, invoked as the dark goddess of capitalism, causing conservatives everywhere to run in terror, begging not to be associated with the, quote, guru of greed. But these are the points that you bring out that Christians could benefit from and conservatives could benefit from in Ayn Rand. Number 1, you write in the article, she had a high view of the mind. Explain what your thoughts are on that.
Most atheists today have a low view of the mind or just no view of the mind. They see man as just an animal with instincts and reflexes, and the technical term is materialistic determinism. That's sort of what most atheists believe about man, that man is just built up of chemical reactions, and he's a materialistic, deterministic machine, and all of the things that we would talk about regarding the mind are just sort of accidental. They're sort of byproducts. That's the common atheist view of man today. But a lot of Christians implicitly agree with that. They sort of treat man as though he's nothing more than an animal, while affirming that he's made in the image of God. But they don't have any content to that. I call it just slapping God on top. They take the atheistic and a lot of times Marxist view of man as no more significant in function, in nature, than ants in a colony, or than buffalo in a herd. And you get this sort of herd mindset among a lot of Christians, especially some conservative Christians, right? And they think that they're better than the atheist merely because they affirm, quote unquote, man is made in the image of God. But if you ask them what they mean by that, all they have is sort of pious sounding nothingness to fill the gap. It's usually something along the lines of, well, we were made to glorify God, or we have the capacity of love. Okay, well, what does that mean? It's this foofy, pietistic sounding nothingness. We want to recover the historic Christian view of man, of anthropology, that says that man is a rational animal. And the thing that sets man apart from beasts, from animals, is his rationality, his mind, his mental capacity. In fact, that is what we mean when we talk about man being made in the image of God. It's not exhaustive of it, but it's essential to it. Man is made in the image of God means that man has the capacity to change the world, to act on it and adapt it to his purposes rather than adapting to the world the way that all animals do. And so, and it's man's mind that gives him that power. And that is what Rand focuses on. Rand stands out from all the other atheists of her time in affirming, no, man does have a mind, and the mind does have causal efficaciousness. The mind is able to act apart from materialistic deterministic causes. The mind is not just a meaningless byproduct of chemical reactions. The mind has causal efficacy. And that is the essential differentiating factor of man in comparison to the other animals, according to Rand. And so on that point, along with many others, she is more in line with the historic Christian view than all the atheists of her time and than many Christians functionally today.
And it's not only that she's in line with historic Christianity, but also that she is providing tools for understanding how it is true. She gives an account for how concepts work. It's her theory of concepts. She gives an account of what objectivity is. These things, once you've seen what they are, you can assess them for yourself. This is her theory. Is it true or not? Does it correspond or not to what we see in the world and in people acting in the world? And once you determine that it is true, then you'll know a lot more about whether or not Rand's perspective on the role of the mind is true. Because it's not just she's saying that it's true. She's showing how it's true. Now, here's a passage, and you have this in your article, from Ayn Rand. It's from her book, For the New Intellectual. Give you an idea of what we were thinking when we named our project For the New Christian Intellectual. This is what Rand says. Man cannot survive in the kind of state of nature that the ecologists envision, i.e. on the level of sea urchins or polar bears. In that sense, man is the weakest of animals. He is born naked and unarmed, without fangs, claws, horns, or, quote, instinctual knowledge. Physically, he would fall an easy prey not only to the higher animals, but also to the lowest bacteria. He is the most complex organism, and in a contest of brute force, extremely fragile and vulnerable. His only weapon, his basic means of survival, is his mind. In order to survive, man has to discover and produce everything he needs, which means that he has to alter his background and adapt it to his needs. Nature has not equipped him for adapting himself to his background in the manner of animals. From the most primitive cultures to the most advanced civilizations, man has had to manufacture things. His well-being depends on his success at production. The lowest human tribe cannot survive without that alleged source of pollution, fire. It is not merely symbolic that fire was the property of the gods, which Prometheus brought to man. The ecologists are the new vultures swarming to extinguish that fire. You write then in response to the quote from Rand that she saw man as fundamentally different, far more valuable than any other animal, and much of that was tied to her recognition of the central role of the mind in man's life. So there's one issue, is the role of the mind. And if you are somebody that attends most mainstream evangelical churches or that visits Twitter, you will notice that the role of the mind is sadly neglected within evangelicalism. Comments before we move forward to the next topic?
No, let's move on.
Number 2 was she promoted spiritual values even above material ones. This is something that we can benefit from Ayn Rand because she pointed out the natural evidence that human beings are spiritual beings. This is useful in your apologetic toward atheists in order to show, well, let's point it out that there is such thing as the spirit. There is such thing as this spiritual component to man. So how do we account for that? And does that have any implications that we need to discuss? So that's a real excellent beachhead if you are trying to make an apologetic case. Beyond that, it is also an answer to many of the problems that we have in analyzing society. All right, share with me, Jacob, your thoughts on this topic.
Yeah, first I want to point out that this is going to sound counterintuitive if you've heard anything about Rand from her enemies, right? Because most people want to smear her as being a rabid materialist, as focusing only and exclusively on materialistic values like money or physical wealth. And so when you read this subtitle in this article, she promoted spiritual values even above material ones, you're going to be a little shocked and probably a little skeptical. But that's probably because you and or her critics haven't actually read her. Her novels, I might be overstating here, but I think it's the case that all of her novels exalt some sort of spiritual values above material ones in the main characters, in the protagonists. Cody might be able to correct me because I'm not thinking through all of them super clearly right now, but that's absolutely the case in Atlas Shrugged, which is her magnum opus. She has characters, and I don't want to give any spoilers away because we want to encourage you to go and read Atlas Shrugged. It's an amazing novel. She has characters in Atlas Shrugged who are the heroes of the story. And those heroes, one of the reasons that they're heroic, given the context and given the plot, is that they are willing to give up major aspects of their material wealth for the sake of maintaining spiritual values. And usually those spiritual values are things like integrity, rationality, honesty, virtues, in other words. So that's one of the values here with Rand. It's not only that she agrees with Christians that spiritual values are higher than material values in the ultimate sense. It's that she identifies spiritual values so that it's not just some esoteric, yes, the spirit is better than the body, because that leads to Gnosticism. And that's going to be the next point that we cover, that she fought hard against Gnosticism in certain ways. But this is one of the sort of precursors to fighting Gnosticism, is identifying the exact nature of the spiritual values that do transcend material values and understanding the connection between the two so that you don't get the sense that when you say spiritual values are more important than physical values or material values, you don't get the sense that you're just thinking about strumming a harp on a cloud as the goal for giving up your material values, which is what most Christians have in mind. Most Christians, when they think about spiritual values being higher than material values or being better than material values, if you ask them, what do you mean by those spiritual values? It'll be something esoteric, like sitting on a cloud, strumming a harp for eternity, or the beatific vision. And when you ask them what that is, they can't give any concretes. It's just a sort of emotional sense of awe and wonder, which is not the type of spiritual value, I think, that Christianity puts forward. I think Christianity puts forward spiritual values that are about character, that are about virtues, that are about morality. And the truth that we get to ultimately pursue both material and spiritual values through those virtues and through that character in the new heavens and new earth.
In Rand's conception, and also in the Christian conception, if you understand the Bible properly, you have to see that your work is an extension of your spiritual values. It's an extension of your character, and your property is an extension of your work. And so we have an integrated view there. Going to the next section, number 3, she worked hard at integrating the spiritual and the physical. And you write, Gnosticism was an early Christian heresy which taught that the physical world and all the pleasures and values which come along with it is evil, while the spiritual world was good. That the goal of morality and religion is to escape the evil material world and to reach the paradise of a purely spiritual existence. Unfortunately, this is a heresy, which, at least implicitly, seems to rear its ugly head in every new generation within the church. The fight against Gnosticism is a perennial one, and Ayn Rand is one of the rare atheists who recognized the dangers of Gnosticism, though not by name, and sought to fight it. And you have a quote from her there. What would you like to share about this issue?
I think a lot of Christians, unfortunately, have fallen into Gnostic mindsets today. There are some who want to pursue a sort of asceticism that views material well-being and wealth as suspect or as bad or sinful. And so they retreat into what we might call pietism, where you just focus on your own spiritual development or the spiritual development of you and your family, and you sort of shun the rest of the world because morality doesn't have anything to do with the rest of the world. And then you've got others who want to act in the material world because they do see the value of the material world, but they want to act mindlessly, or they want to divorce morality from their action in the material world. Because if you try to apply morality to the material world, then in their minds, you're being unrealistic. You're not being practical. You're being too abstract. You're being too idealistic. And so you've got different sorts of Christians, and I think this is the case on both the left and the right, politically speaking. You've got different sorts of Christians who are going to one bad side or the other of the Gnostic divide. And we want to reject that entire divide. We want an integrated view of man's mind and his material wealth. We want an integrated view of character and action, an integrated view of spirit and body that extends out from your personal life to your family life, to your church life, to life in the rest of the world, including politics. That's what we want. And that's what we find in Rand. And so that's one of the reasons that we think that Rand is particularly valuable, especially to Christians, because she helps you to see how those things can be integrated in everyday life, not just theoretically, but practically in all the particulars you can imagine.
I remember several years back, we recorded a short video interacting with something said by Ben Shapiro. Ben Shapiro had said that it would be selfish to go and reject your wife or cheat on your wife with some younger, hotter model. And he's like, and so therefore you shouldn't be selfish. And he's coming at this from a traditionalist, conservative, and Jewish background. And it's similar to what we see in many Christians today. They will say the same kinds of things. I've seen people that represent Reformed Christianity on Twitter saying things like, oh, that's selfishness to go and do this horrible, wicked thing. And this issue of Gnosticism, I think, is related to how people conceive morality in the world. Because if you have accepted that there's this divide between the practical and the moral, then you would also, there's a related issue of how to understand your own motivation. And it will change how you feel or think about the topic of pursuing your own self-interest, because you will think that if I can see how it's connected to my interest right now, that's not what's related to whether it's moral. Those are different issues. And depending on how you understand that issue, you might end up going from, I see that it's in my interest, to saying, well, then it's definitely not moral. Or you might look at something that is, like in this case, doing something that's wicked, and you might say, that's immoral. I know it's wicked, but it is in my own interest. And so you can, there's multiple ways that you could have confusions about this issue, like in the case of Ben Shapiro. Ayn Rand shows us how values are connected to the way that human beings must live, and spiritual values even. And so when you have that understanding, then you don't fall into this Gnostic trap. And interestingly, if you look at the Bible without the assumption of this Gnosticism, you'll see that that's what the Bible's been saying the whole time. In the Old Testament, we have many examples of people saying, give me this mountain, or, oh, that you would bless me and expand my territory. Or you have an example of God rewarding Solomon because he asked for wisdom to be a good leader on earth of his people. Oh, I'm going to give you long life and wisdom and wealth. And Abraham, any number of people that God has blessed. And then in the New Testament, you find the same thing. One of the passages says, I pray that all is well with you in your spirit as in all things, not just in the spiritual, but in all things, is physical health. The desire that your children would be healthy, the desire that they'd be well educated and that they'd have shoes. These are not unholy desires. And we have so many people that will tell us that no, the New Testament supplants that ethic in the Old Testament. It doesn't. And you can go on our Twitter and see our discussions of these topics with people. It's entertaining, but in the end, it's devastating if somebody accepts these Gnostic ideas, or if somebody accepts this idea that there's a separation between the practical and the moral. So that's why philosophy matters, because if you don't think philosophically when you go to approach Scripture, you're going to make it say what you want it to say rather than asking yourself what it's saying.
Yes, I think the essential issue there that is helpful to remember is that morality is practical. And that is shot through all of Rand's writing on the topic of morality. Morality is always practical. And I think the reason that a lot of people, especially a lot of Christians, or you might even say a lot of religious people, if you want to include Jews like Shapiro or maybe others, I think the reason that a lot of those types can get caught up on this is because they do see that there are some instances in which it appears that morality requires self-sacrifice. But it is always and only in the context of giving up something lesser for the sake of something greater. It is always giving up a lesser value to yourself for the sake of something which is more valuable for yourself. It is, and it's only because of a context where you have to do that. The Bible doesn't teach that the only way, like universally, the only way to get what is ultimately good for you is to sacrifice other good things that are good for you. Rather, it's that there are certain contexts in which you do have to sacrifice things that seem good for you for the sake of things that are better for you. Take an example of wealth. When Jesus went to the rich young ruler and said, go sell all you have and give it to the poor, and then you can be my disciple, it wasn't because Jesus was teaching that all rich people must sell all that they have and give it all to the poor in order to be a true disciple of Jesus. It was because that one rich young ruler idolized his wealth. He valued his wealth more than he valued Jesus. And Jesus knew that. And he was testing him or proving to him that he wasn't a true lover of Jesus the way that he ought to be. So it's not that you have to give up wealth in order to be a follower of Christ. It's that if you are a genuine follower of Christ, you will be willing to give up wealth if and when he demands it of you.
Your next section in your article is number 4. She's had a lasting and growing influence on the culture. So you write, in spite of the insults hurled at her from both sides of the political aisle, Ayn Rand has had a profound impact on the culture, and that impact is growing, not shrinking. In a poll conducted by the Library of Congress in 1991, Her magnum opus, Atlas Shrugged, placed second next to the Bible as the most influential book among readers. In 2009, more than 50 years after it was first published, Atlas Shrugged sold more than 500,000 copies. The Ayn Rand Institute holds one of the largest scholarship essay contests every year, paying up to $130,000 to students who have read her novels and entered the contest. In addition, the Institute provides thousands of free books to middle and high school classrooms for educators to teach them as part of their curriculum every year. Last year, teachers ordered 205,000 books from the Institute through this program, and that was several years back when you wrote this article. So you can show that her influence is growing. It's growing in Hollywood, in the kinds of films that are going to be created, in the discussions that people are having, especially in light of the Joe Biden administration or the Obama administration before that. There is a demand for somebody who can come and explain what is collectivism, what is individualism, what is a totalitarian dictatorship, what is fascism, what is communism, what is socialism. Young people are awakening to the fact that the school system has not taught them how to understand any of that. And Ayn Rand is offering answers, and therefore, as Christians, we need to know that people are consuming her work, and we need to be willing to jump in and say, she's right here. And nevertheless, there are other issues where she's wrong. And there are people that have been raised in a Christian household that have discovered Rand and then deconverted. We have to be willing to discuss with those people the reasons why Ayn Rand is mistaken as well. But it's not going to happen if the young people grow up believing that the objectivists or the atheists have the monopoly on intellectualism and that the church has no place for that.
Yeah, if you think about it, a lot of Christians would be all for specifically targeting Muslims, example, for evangelism and missions, or Mormons for evangelism and missions, or even the new atheists in general. But would they feel the same passion or the same sense of virtue if they were to see a group of people specifically targeting objectivists for evangelism and missions? I don't think so. I think the objectivist community it's a growing ideological community, similar to a religious community in many respects, that the church, by and large, wants to ignore. And so we see this as a very large and growing untapped mission field. And we want to reach those people. We don't want to neglect them, especially when there's so much overlap on so many fundamental values between their worldview and the Christian worldview. There's a huge opportunity there that we want to take advantage of for the glory of God.
Point number 5 in your essay is she is our best ally against the rising tides of postmodernism and Marxism. Now, this makes me think of a newly prominent atheist, James Lindsay, and how he has been much more useful than any self-described Catholic or Christian in this issue. Only Michael O'Fallon has been of similar usefulness on this issue within Christianity. But outside of Christianity, the rejection of the radical leftist and Marxist and critical race theory mob has come from Jordan Peterson, James Lindsay, and others as well. Peter Boghossian, I believe is his name, and Helen Pluckrose, and others that have exposed the intellectual bankruptcy of academia. We have to be willing to listen when people are saying the truth that no one else is saying. And just like James Lindsay, Ayn Rand has been far earlier than anyone else explaining what these ideas mean and where they lead. Tell me about your thoughts on this issue.
Yeah, immediately my thought, because I was thinking about James Lindsay also. In comparison to James Lindsay, I think Rand also provides the positive vision for the alternative. So James Lindsay does a very good job of rebutting a lot of the Marxist neologisms, which obviously are new. And so Rand wasn't directly dealing with some of the woke nonsense, for instance, that we're dealing with today, or a lot of the transgender nonsense that we're dealing with today, though she did hint at some of it. But Rand did rebut a lot of the fundamental nihilistic ideas. And I think James Lindsay is coming around to agreeing with Rand on that in calling it nihilism, in pointing out that all they want to do is destroy, or if you want to use biblical language, I would like to say all they want to do is steal, kill, and destroy. That is the leftist mantra. That is the quote unquote progressive mission. But Rand also painted a positive vision for what could and should replace the leftist Marxist nihilism. And that's what we ultimately need as conservatives who want to fight that and overcome it. It cannot be overcome simply by opposition. It must be replaced with a superior positive vision. And that's where Rand really excels, in not just condemning the evil of the nihilism of Marxism, but of celebrating and painting a vision of the beauty and the life-affirming glory of capitalism and of all the virtues that surround it.
You point out in your essay that Rand was willing to reclaim the moral high ground, which is so different from Charlie Kirk or any of these Twitter guys that do so well with getting the retweets, but that only ever say, haha, I caught you in a lie. Haha, you hypocrite. Tu quoque. You write, in order to reclaim the moral high ground, she knew that the battle would require complete devotion to objective truth. We're not just analyzing other people's statements, but we're seeking the truth. Over against the relativism of those of the left, indeed, she saw that the ability to pursue objective truth and the morality of capitalism were inextricably linked. Intellectual freedom cannot exist without political freedom. This is something that's becoming more clear to most people today, is that what's happening is the radical left, the World Economic Forum, those goons, they want to deprive you of intellectual freedom, cognitive freedom, freedom of speech. This is what's at stake. And you quote Rand, intellectual freedom cannot exist without political freedom. Political freedom cannot exist without economic freedom. A free mind and a free market are corollaries. And she explains that in every detail that you would ever need to understand the issue. And that's something that I've hardly ever seen a Christian do.
Yes, and this goes back to what we were originally talking about, that integration of mind and body, of spirit and material wealth. You can't have intellectual freedom without material freedom. Think about it. We all sort of know this when we think about religious freedom, right? A lot of Christians like to focus on religious freedom. What does that mean? Do you have religious freedom if you're allowed to believe whatever you want to believe, but you have to keep it to yourself? You can't act on it. You can't act on your religious convictions. Do you have religious freedom in that case? No, obviously not. Religious freedom means the freedom to act in accordance to your religious convictions. Likewise, intellectual freedom means the freedom to act in accordance with your intellectual convictions, with your convictions per se. It means the freedom to act according to your worldview, in reality, in the market, using your own wealth and the wealth that you agree upon exchanging with others. This is why a free mind and a free market are corollaries, because of that mind-body integration that we were talking about earlier.
The last part of the essay that we're looking at today, remember you can find this at christianintellectual.com/reconsider, is where you describe Rand's takedown of the morality of pathological altruism. And you write, it's no secret that Rand raged against the morality of altruism. It's one of the primary reasons she is so maligned, especially by Christians who think that the Bible teaches the morality of altruism unequivocally. While I think a closer reading of both Rand and the Bible would reveal more similarity on this issue than most expect, I don't think you have to be convinced about Rand's morality of rational self-interest for human beings in order to see the value of it when it comes to thinking about God. So let's talk about God's egoism, this concept of divine egoism. By the way, the heading of this section is, She Will Help You Worship God More Fully, which is intriguing. So you quote from Isaiah 48, 9 through 11, For my name's sake I defer my anger. For the sake of my praise I restrain it for you, that I may not cut you off. Behold, I have refined you, but not as silver. I have tried you in the furnace of affliction. For my own sake, I do it. For how should my name be profaned? My glory I will not give to another. If you don't love a God who's capable of speaking like that, then you do not love the God who created you.
Yes, sadly, most Christians today have imbibed the idea that altruism is the essence of morality, that self-sacrifice is the essence of morality, or serving others is the essence of morality. And the flip side of that, that value, that self-interest is the essence of evil. Most Christians are just implicitly convinced of that, even if they wouldn't say it explicitly. Their knee-jerk reaction to any instance of self-value or self-interest is that's suspect, that's immoral, that's sinful. But that flies directly in the face of the character of the God of the Bible. The God of the Bible is unabashedly self-interested. Like he rubs it in your face. And the passage that Cody just read is a clear indication of that. But it's all over Scripture. This is not a proof text. From beginning to end in Scripture, God makes it abundantly clear that the ultimate reason he does everything that he does is for his own glory, and he's not ashamed of it. He wants you to know it, and he wants you to worship him because of that. He wants you to be moved to worship him when you think about the fact that he's motivated by his own glory more than he's motivated by caring for you as a creature. He wants that to move you to worship him. But that can't happen. You can't be moved to worship him if you believe that self-interest is inherently evil and that self-sacrifice for the sake of others is the essence of virtue. If you believe that, then the logical conclusion is that the God of the Bible is a moral monster. And sadly, that's what most Christians implicitly believe. They would never say it until they start to deconstruct their faith and apostatize, which we're seeing more and more of. But it starts with doubting certain things, where God is forcing his glory in ways that makes you uncomfortable. Maybe it's the patriarchy, where God's glory is shining through a little too brightly. Or maybe it's penal substitutionary atonement. It seems harsh. Or maybe it's eternal conscious torment in hell. That seems really harsh. And so you start to fudge on those things. You start to pull threads. Maybe it's, socialism isn't that bad. Stealing isn't that bad. The idea that it's okay, it's just even to take what you need from somebody as long as you need it. All of that is pulling on threads that is ultimately motivated by the idea that the God of the Bible is a moral monster and that the morality of the Bible is contrary to what is truly moral. It's a moral inversion. The church has been captured by a moral inversion through this pathological altruism. And Rand is a major antidote to that. I'm not aware of any non-Christian. I'm aware of few Christians and no other non-Christians besides Rand who will help you to overcome that moral inversion.
So what does God in Scripture want us to know about his character? Well, one of the things is he wants us to know that he flooded the whole earth and killed probably millions of people because their every thought was on evil and because that's the righteous thing to do. He wants us to know that he's jealous. And that's something that you tell a child or you tell somebody with a child's mindset and they'll say, "Excuse me? Jealous? I thought that was always a bad thing." Oh, no, it's not. Not always. God claims vengeance as his prerogative. And so as a child or someone with a child's mindset, you may say, "Excuse me?" God claims to hate people. You might say, "Excuse me?" And the issue here is we have to be careful as human beings about who we hate or if we celebrate their downfall, because then God will actually withhold his judgment of them just so that we won't go too far in our wickedness of hating them in a wicked way. In our desire for vengeance, God is not pleased because God says that it's for him, not for us. But what does this tell us about God? It tells us that these things like judgment, hatred, vengeance, they are perhaps too good to be executed by any other than God himself, because he is the judge of the earth. That's who he is. And a society full of atheists and purported Christians that want themselves to be the judges of the earth are going to look at this idea and they're going to reject it. They're going to reject the Bible. So we as Christians need to make this case even for our fellow Christians, that it is rational that God would be the judge of the earth. And we can do it in a way that is not just assuming blind dogmatism either, but rather we can do it in a way that is open to logical argumentation about why God ought to be that way. So that wraps up the article that we were just discussing. And I also want to go over to just one other thing that I recommend at our website that you check out. You can go to christianintellectual.com/about-us, and you can read what we stand for. The main things that FT&CI is designed to advocate are reason, rational self-interest, individualism, individual rights. If you're familiar with the philosophical categories, we've hit the main philosophical categories there. We think that that is necessary in order to restore in the church a love for the truth and a vision for Jesus Christ, the one that we see in the scripture that we've just been describing, the one that is worthy of all admiration and all devotion. We seek to unravel the lies that have been told about what the scripture says that lead to fideism, altruism, social justice, all these things. That's what we're doing, and that's why we bring in Ayn Rand. And we have a whole section, if you look at the bottom of that same page, there's a section, Ayn Rand and Christianity. A lot of people have expressed concerns. There have been people that told me that what I am advocating at this YouTube channel is, what's the word for it? Eclecticism. They said it looks like I have abandoned sola scriptura. Well, these people don't hold a historic understanding of that concept of sola scriptura. They need to go back to the books because they disagree with John Calvin. And they disagree with the majority of the Puritans. And so what they're accusing us of is confused. At this time in the development of the church and the evangelical movement in the United States, there is a divide between those evangelicals who are just abandoning scripture altogether. The Gospel Coalition wants to reconsider the statement on inerrancy on the one hand, and then there are many that are, I think, dogmatists in the Van Tillian camp that want to say we don't need philosophy. But there is a different way than either of those two options, and that's what we are offering at christianintellectual.com, because we have answered the question, what has Athens to do with Jerusalem? Well, thank you for joining, and I would recommend get on our email list if you're not, and become a patron. That's one of the easiest ways that you can help this message get to more people, is become a patron, and you can do that by going to christianintellectual.com/Patreon. Jacob, I'll leave you with any closing thoughts.
I think what you said about the work of discovering how Athens and Jerusalem relate is a good way to wrap up. And the answer is they relate on everything. They have everything to do with each other. Philosophy, Athens, has everything to do with Christianity, with religion, because of that integration that we were talking about, because of the integration of mind and body, of values and morality with action in the real world. So that's what we're about, and that's what we're hoping that you'll join us in.